Dr. Naresh Keerthi, and invite him to deliver the talk. Dr. Naresh.
Thank you, sir. I'll try and speak slowly because there seems to be trouble with the internet, and if something goes, if something gets lost, you can then intervene and ask me to repeat a little bit.
Yes.
First of all, thank you, Professor N.K. Sundareshwaran, for inviting me to talk in this Samvada Malika series. I have great respect for Professor Sundareshwaran, both as a scholar, as an individual. I have always been enriched by talking and corresponding with him. And thank you all for coming, Professor Venu Panikar. You two are like a teacher to me. I've learned a lot from you and by reading and discussing with you. And Ajitan, and there are many people here whom I don't know also. Thank you for coming. It's quite appropriate that I've been reading now for over 10 years the Bhāvaviveka and trying to think about what kind of text it is and trying to write something about it. And it's quite appropriate that I should present my first talk. This is the first time I'm presenting anything about this text for this forum that you're all associated with. Because after all, as you may know, this text, the Bhāvaviveka of Divākara, is a text from Kerala. And it was kind of known, people, when Purna Saraswati's Vidyullata commentary on the Megha Sandesha was published, and when later Parameshwara's Sumano Ramani commentary again on the Megha Sandesha was published, the larger scholarly world from the citations there knew about the existence of Divākara and his text. But I think the first full-fledged article about the Bhāvaviveka and citations from the Bhāvaviveka is by Professor Sundareshwaran in a volume that came out of Ujjain. And also the first edition of this text, the editio princeps, as they say, it was brought out by Professor NVP Unnithiri as an appendix to his excellent book on Purna Saraswati. Some people may not know this. The Purna Saraswati thesis of Professor Unnithiri can be found on Shodhganga today. But when he made it into a book, it came out in 2006 in the Calicut University Sanskrit series. It had a very important addition, and that was that as an appendix, he had included his edition of Purna Saraswati's Bhāvaviveka. Strictly speaking, this is not the first time that the Karikas from the Bhāvaviveka were published. There was one other source where almost all these verses have been published. I'll come to that later in my talk. Now, because of all of these reasons, the fact that Bhāvaviveka and its author Divākara seem to be from Kerala, and the fact that this text is extensively quoted by Keralite commentators of Kavya and Nataka texts, and the fact that it was written about by Professor Sundareshwaran from Calicut Uni, and the first edition was by Professor Unnithiri from Calicut Uni. It's kind of nice that I'm doing the talk for you. I too have some connection with Kerala. I'm not from there, but I spent a couple of years living in Tripunitura, and I have a great fascination and respect for these Vyakhyatas, these commentators of Kavya and Natya, Nataka texts from Kerala. And it all began with Purna Saraswati. My love affair with the commentators from Kerala and also my love affair with Bhāvaviveka begins with Purna Saraswati. And there are citations from the Bhāvaviveka in the Vidyullekha commentary. And I must say, if any of you had to make recommendations to a student, that the Vidyullekha is far, far superior commentary on the Megha Sandesha to say Mallinathas, which is not that either of these people, Mallinatha or Purna Saraswati, need any certificate from me, but for maybe because of reasons of print, the fact that Mallinathas was available in print soon and many copies were made and many editions came out in different parts of the country, I think it is maybe undeservedly more popular and it is read more. Whereas if you look at not just this, but other commentaries of Purna Saraswati, but especially I can vouch for the Vidyulekha, not only does it explain the words in the Megha Sandesha and the general idea of the verse in the Megha Sandesha, but commentaries of this caliber, they even teach us how to read the Kavya, how to look at the points of significance and where we must pay attention. Why has a certain nipata been used in a certain way? So these kinds of commentary are practical guides in Rasa Shastra and Alankara Shastra in a way that textbooks like the Kavya Prakasha or Sahitya Darpana can never be. I don't include the Dhvanyaloka in this criticism because we have moments in the Dhvanyaloka where he makes a little digression in the Vritti especially and takes up some verse or selection from a Kavya and gives his general style of how to appreciate a verse or how to appreciate even a text, and those are very rare and those are very valuable moments, I think, in literary criticism, which is not just a kind of mechanical translation of individual words and then identification of some avantara bheda of the alankaras. So I feel that this is overall a very fruitful area of work. I identify this as my area of research, which is to read these commentaries not just in terms of them being aids to understand that particular text or the verses and the lines from that particular play or kavya, but also as teaching us general principles in how to read kavya and in how to appreciate kavya. Moving on, let me give you some general information about the Bhāvaviveka. It's a text in approximately 100 karikas, maybe 110 verses. They are mostly in the Anushtup. Towards the end, there are some, and each is a verse defining one bhava. Sometimes a bhava is defined in half a verse. Sometimes you spend two verses and you have two verses giving two kinds of lakshanas or karikas for maybe two types of a certain bhava, or you just use two definitions for a bhava. And towards the end, there are some 10 verses which describe these Angika bhavas, and these verses are directly quoted from the Natya Shastra. So bhavas like which we don't use so much in everyday usage and mostly in Nataka texts, I think. Bhavas like Bibboka and Kuttamita, and these he has not formulated new definitions. He feels that whatever Bharata has said, that we can just continue that definition because there is not much to do to improve upon previous definitions. And unfortunately, because of this, a previous scholar who looked at the Bhāvaviveka, this is the Assamese Sanskrit scholar, Krishnakant Khondik, who produced a translation of the Setubandha. He has in front of him a manuscript of commentary of the Setubandha, perhaps from the 17th century or a little bit later, by a scholar Krishna Suri from Malabar. And he sees citations of the Bhāvaviveka, and he has then Professor Khondik, he manages to get a manuscript perhaps from his friends in Madras or in Kerala, and he says this is not such an important text, and anyway most of the verses are plagiarized from the Natya Shastra, and this is a very unfair evaluation. In the end, clearly there are those 10 verses that he takes from the Natya Shastra, but the bulk of the text is original, and it is very original. The definitions of the bhavas are very crisp, as Professor Sundareshwaran said in his introduction. Usually in the discussion of bhavas, in the standard texts where we see this happen, Natya Shastra, Dasharupaka, also Bhojas, Shringara Prakasha, Sharadhatanaya's Bhava Prakashana, and some other texts like Rudrabhatta's Rasakalika or Singhabhupala's Rasarna Sudhakara. There is a section where the rasas are defined and then maybe some examples are given, and then a section where the bhavas are defined, and especially with the Vyabhichari bhavas, they mostly paraphrase the definitions of the Purvasuris, and often these definitions are a bit vague or they suffer from circularity. If you are describing sukha, and if you say it is the abhava of dukkha, that is not a very helpful definition. Imagine someone who is trying to clearly understand what each of these emotional states like priti, darpa, garva, and so on mean, and you only define it in terms of another, then it kind of has this, it's not quite what the Nayayikas would call the chakraka dosha, but something equivalent to that. You have a circularity of definitions. You say, what is a bird? Bird is a thing like a crow or a rooster. And what is a crow? Crow is a kind of bird. Imagine a dictionary where all the definitions suffer from this kind of a mutual loop. And then it would be very difficult for someone to use a text like this. The Bhāvaviveka is not like that. It has very well formulated, intuitively graspable definitions. Let me read you the beginning karikas where he kind of does this Granthakara Pratignya. He says, Pranamya bhava rasayoho anukartaram ishwaram viveka kriyate smabhihi satvikangikayos tatha satvikangikayos tayoho janannapi jano bhedan etayoho abhidhanatah sphutam antam na janati tallaksharthoya mudyamaha. So he's saying, Ayamudyamaha, this effort of writing this text, Bhāvaviveka, is because Janaha etayoho, meaning Satvika Bhava, Angika Bhavayoho, Bhedan Jananapi, even though people know the varieties of Satvika Bhavas and Angika Bhavas, Antam na janati, Sphutam Antam na janati. They do not clearly know the antaranga, the actual substance of these bhavas, which is why I'm writing this text. And then he starts, and the first karika is on Preeti, and the next karika is on Nirvriti, and so on. Let me go back for a moment to a discussion of Professor Unitri's edition of the text. He has edited it with very limited material. It's a hard text to edit, though it is small. There is not much manuscript material. There are 4 manuscripts, 2 in the Tripunithura College manuscript collection, 1 in Trivandrum and 1 in GOML. And all of these are practically the same manuscript, because there is, in Tripunithura, there is 1 older and 1 newer manuscript. And this newer manuscript in Tripunithura, the manuscript from Madras and the one in Trivandrum, they're all epigraphs or copies of the older manuscript in Tripunithura. So there is no significant variation there. But what is noteworthy about this text and what helps us to kind of compare and improve the edition of the text is that it is richly cited from by these Kavya Nataka commentators from Kerala. And there is also something interesting about these commentators, which is that many of them, they cite verses from the Bhāvaviveka without naming the source. So often you will just find them saying Yathoktam or Yatha and Uchyate, and then they will give a verse from this text. And now, because we have Unitri's edition, we know that it is from a text called Bhāvaviveka. Some commentators, however, will occasionally attribute the verse and say Yatha Divākara, and they will name the author. It is very rare that we find the text being named. So only one of these commentators called Sarvajna Vanamuni, who is also a discovery of Professor Unitiri's, he discovered manuscripts of the commentaries, partial commentaries on the Kumara Sambhava and Raghuvamsha by this sannyasin commentator called Sarvajna Vanamuni. He alone, when he cites from this text, he names it as Bhāvaviveka. And I think so far we haven't found a single source where they both name Divākara and Bhāvaviveka. It's only from the incipit of the manuscript that we know that Bhāvaviveka is by Divākara, and that all of these have to be put together. And because of this overlap of theme, and because of a wrong judgment of similarity of style, often we find these commentators misquoting verses from the Bhāvaviveka and attributing it to the Bhava-prakasha of Sharadatanaya. And sometimes even authors who are aware about the existence of Divākara, it could be that they knew these verses by heart and did not have manuscript in front of them. So because of the similarity of style, they will misattribute a verse from this text to Sharadatanaya, or they will name the text and say Yatha Bhav Prakashale. And then how much ever you search for it, you will not find the verse quoted in that text. So this is another thing that we notice with regard to Bhava Prakashana. Unitiri, in his edition, in the critical apparatus, he has noted 5 authors of commentaries on Kavya and Nataka who cite from this text. These citations are of great value. They can be used as what are called testimonia, meaning as secondary evidence for editing the karikas of this text. Unitiri has given all these citations in footnotes in the critical apparatus, but I don't think he has used these alternate versions in his edition. That is to say, he has not used them to improve the reading of the text. And this is kind of where I come in. I'm trying, and it's a work in progress, to systematically collect all the citations of the Bhāvaviveka for 2 reasons. One is I want to improve the edition of the text and to record all the significant variation, but also, and perhaps more importantly, my second aim is to understand what one could call the reception history of this text, which means how well was it known? And this is the study of reception history is one of our weaker points when it comes to Sanskrit texts and Indian texts in general, which is that how long was a text known or not known for? We have 2 important early kavyas. We have the Buddha Charita of Ashvaghosha, and we have, let's say, the Raghuvamsha of Kalidasa. And with some difference of a few years, they were not contemporaries, but they were close to each other. But there is a world of difference in the reception history of these 2 texts. One was widely read, widely commented upon, widely cited by writers of koshas, by writers of Kavya Shastra, and the other was almost forgotten for 1,000 years. And there are nearly no citations to be found from the 2 Mahakavyas of Ashvaghosha. And it's important, while we kind of consider the history of literature, also this, were there slippages and breakages in the history of the reading and the reception and the circulation of texts. And fortunately, because we have this dense network of commentators who cite either primary or secondary citations from the Bhāvaviveka, we are able to see whatever is the date of the text. I'll come to it in a moment. We're able to see that there seems to have been a continuous tradition of remembering and engaging and citing from this text almost down to the 19th century. There is a tricky question about whether everybody read the karikas of the Bhāvaviveka directly from the source, or if they received some of these verses like I did by reading commentaries and received the verses secondhand. That is also a problem which can be solved. Coming to the date of the Bhāvaviveka, I'm not fully sure we can date it with great certainty. At least we know that Purna Saraswati gives us the upper limit for dating the text. If you look at Professor Unitri's thesis, he has several claims about Bhāvaviveka and the Divākara. These involve several assumptions and leaps of faith, but they could be correct. Right now, I'm not at a point to make any conclusive remarks. Here's the summary of his argument. Professor Unitri identifies Purna Saraswati with Vishnu, the author of the Anargharaghava Panchika. There is a big Panchika and a small Panchika. And this Vishnu, he mentions that he had a brother called Divākara. Now, the only important author known from Kerala called Divākara has written a text called the Amogha Champu. This text now has been, I don't think it has been published, but there are two PhD theses which have, it's a bit funny that two people will make their thesis on the same topic on bringing out editions of the Amogha Champu. Our scholar, Professor Unitri, dates that the Amogha Champu based on the so-called Kali chronogram verse, which has Chandra Netra Dvayakshmabhi. He dates it to 1299 CE, that is the end of the 13th century. And based on this, he dates Vishnu, and based on this, he dates Purna Saraswati. Right now, this is not the most interesting question for me, and also I'm not in a position to pass judgment about whether this is correct or wrong. It could very well be the right date. It kind of fits with other dates. But whether indeed Vishnu was Purna Saraswati, whether Vishnu's brother Divākara, and therefore Purna Saraswati's brother Divākara, is also the Divākara who wrote the Bhāvaviveka, I'm not sure about. We can't say that for sure. But enough of talking around the text. Let's actually look at the inside of the text. I would like to discuss this kind of glossary of bhavas, of aesthetic emotions, by looking first at one verse. If we have time, we'll look at another. A karika that defines Mahatma, the state of being great. The karika is as follows: Avaptavyanya avaptani yasya sarvani dehinah paropakara vyasani samahan abhidhiyate. So samahan abhidhiyate, he is called a great person. Yasya avaptavyani avaptani, who has achieved everything that can be. Sarvani avaptavyani avaptani. So everything that needs to be achieved, or everything that can be achieved, he has accomplished. Such a dehin, who is a paropakara vyasani, who is passionate, or one could say obsessed with helping others. Mahan abhidhiyate. He is called Mahan. We find citations of this verse in many places. It is found in the Rasamanjari commentary of Purna Saraswati on the Malati Madhava and other places as well. But instead of looking at citations, let's think a little bit about what was the material that Divākara used to formulate this karika. So this definition of Mahan, and some of you may have already kind of guessed it, we find that it's kind of a paraphrase of a verse from the Gita. So speaking of the all-encompassing nature of karma, in the third chapter in the Gita, Krishna gives himself as an example to explain this. And he says, Name parthasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana. Nanavaptam avaptavyam varta evacha karmani. So there is nothing worth attaining for him, avaptavyam, that he has not attained. Na anavaptam. Meaning that everything that has to be got, avaptavyam, he has got. So using two negatives, na anavaptam, it has not been got, meaning I've got all of those things. Name kartavyam asti trishu lokeshu kinchana, and there is nothing that I need to do. There is no action that I need to do. Nonetheless, varta meaning varte evacha karmani. Nonetheless, I persist in action. And if we take this along with the previous verse, 3.21 in the Gita, that defines Shrestha. I think maybe the verse is Yadyadacharati Shrestha. I can't quite remember. And so this is a characterization of one whose actions are taken as an ideal by other people. So lokastad anuvartate. So we can take these verses together to be a definition not just of what Krishna does, but also of a great person or a Shrestha, because that's what the previous verse is about, Yadyad Acharati, Shrestha. And this, in this verse from the Gita, which is Na Anavaptam Avaptavyam, along with the idea of the Shrestha, has kind of been repurposed in the Bhāvaviveka verse as Avaptavyani. Avaptavyani, Avaptavyani, Avaptani. Yes. So in the Bhāvaviveka, it's Avaptavyani, Avaptani.
Avaptavyani sarvani avaptani.
Avaptavyani, Avaptani, yasya sarvani dehina. That's right. Sarvani Avaptavyani, Avaptani. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it is Nanavaptam Avaptavyam. And the second half of the verse, in the Bhāvaviveka verse, it goes Paropakara Vyasani Samahan Abhidhiyate. We can always also try and find a clue for where this part of the verse comes from, though it is not as strong an evidence. There is a very nice verse from the Harsha Charita, which illustrates Arthantaranyasa, and it also gives an account of great people. So it goes, Ragini Naline Lakshmim Divaso Nidadhati Dinakara Prabhavam. Ragini Naline Lakshmim Divasaha Nidadhati Dinakara Prabhavam Anapekshita Gunadoshaha Paropakara Satam Vyasanam. So the second half is like the Lokokti. Paropakara Satam Vyasanam. So the good people are passionate or obsessed with helping others, Paropakaraha, and Anapekshita Gunadoshaha, without regarding their virtues or faults, gunas and doshas. And what is the example for this? Ragini Naline Divasaha Dinakara Prabhavam Lakshmim Nidadhati. So the day makes the lotus enchanting, and it adds the splendor of the Dinakara, of the sun. And so this is the idea that there is some kind of an avyaja kindness, an unconditional kindness, which is not based on whether the other reciprocates or not. So the idea of paropakara satam vyasanam, I feel, from this verse, though it's a general idea, and we may have found it repeated elsewhere, paropakara satam vyasanam from here, and the avaptavyan avaptani from nanavaptam avaptavyam from the Gita, I think these two, we could in a way say that they must have been part of general awareness of definition of who a Mahan or an Unnata is. And these two have kind of been put together by Divākara in his definition. So this verse is frequently quoted, and let's also look at what kind of context it's quoted in. In the Malati Madhava, third act, there is a statement by Madhava where he says, Aho upanyasa vishuddhihi, aho mahatvaropane yatnaha. And he says, oh, you're trying to impose greatness upon me. And then Purna Saraswati, while commenting on mahatvaropane, he quotes our verse, avaptavyan avaptani yasya sarvani dehina. It is in the standard version as we would expect it to be. An interesting thing, in the Kumara Sambhava commentary of Sarvagnya Vanamuni, Shishubodhini, also this verse is quoted. But it has not been noticed by Professor Unitiri, because there is no citation given. So he has just given the verse. Avaptavyan avaptani yasya sarvani dehinaha paropakara vyasani samahan abhidhiyate iti ukta lakshano mahachabdartha. And he has given this kind of anonymous citation. So, but again, there is no significant Patha Bheda. We find that in this commentary on the Vishnu Keshadipada Stotra, it is called the Bhakti Mandakini. And I think it was also edited by another student of Professor Unitiri's.
Yes, jointly edited by Professor Unitiri and Harinarayana Bhatta.
Ah, that's right.
Or S.A. Sharma. S.A. Sharma.
Could
yes.
be S.A.S. Sharma, yes. Yes, it did come out of Pondicherry. So in this Bhakti Mandakini commentary, we find that there is an interesting Patha Bheda variant, glossing the word Mahadbhyaha as Avaptavyan yapastani yasya sarvani dehinaha paropakara vyasani samahatma abhidhiyate instead of samahan abhidhiyate. This is Mahatma abhidhiyate instead of Mahan abhidhiyate is not such a significant variant. But avaptavyani apastani is certainly an interesting variant. And also what I think is significant is that the verse is misattributed in the commentary to the Bhava Prakasha. And again, this is not a main part of my study, but I would like to offer this as a little data point. If indeed Purna Saraswati is Vishnu, if indeed the Divākara who wrote Bhāvaviveka is the brother of Vishnu come Purna Saraswati, then I think it's highly unlikely that the author of Bhakti Mandakini would misattribute a verse from a text by his brother to the Bhava Prakasha of Sharada Tanya, who is somewhere far away from Kanchipuram or somewhere. So I just submit this for your consideration, that this may not be as likely as Professor Unitiri has suggested. I have found another citation of this verse, and it helps us in some lateral way. So there is an edition of 3 commentaries of the Kavyadartha of Pandin that was published by D.T. Tatacharya, in which he gives Tarunavachaspati's commentary and then 2 other commentaries, one of which is an anonymous commentary, and we just don't know. He has given the details of the manuscript. But quoting on a verse from the Kavyadarsha, Payomuchaf paritapam harantyeva sharirinam navatmalabho mahatam paradukho pashantaye. Here, this anonymous commentary, it glosses mahatam by giving our verse from the Bhāvaviveka, of course, anonymously. It says, Avaptavyan yavaptani yasya sarvani dehinaha paropakara vyasani samahan abhidhiyate iti payomucham mahatvam. And I think this is a significant point, because though the commentary still remains anonymous, of course, we can at least locate it in space and time, and we can say that this is perhaps a Keralite commentary of the Kavyadarsha, and that this we are able to find a significant citation, because if they cite from, I don't know, if they cite from Kavya Prakasha or from Anandavardhana, it does not help us to localize in space or time a text significantly. It could be from anywhere in the country, it could be from any time after those primary authors. But the fact that we find a citation from the Bhāvaviveka really serves as this key in trying to localize the anonymous commentary of the Kavyadarsha Tika, as it is called. There is a kind of partial paraphrase or citation that I have found in the Shastra Kavya called the Subhadra Harana Mahakavya. This is by Brahmadatta, and it is a family member of Narayana Bhattatiri. We are not entirely certain if it is his brother or his father, but somebody from his family. And Narayana Bhatta quotes extensively from the Subhadraharana Mahakavya in his Prakriya Sarvasva. So there is a verse in the Kavya which goes, Babhuva dravinam tesham datum bhoktum cha sarpishaha prabhabhu cha te datum bhoktum cha dhanam unnataha. And then, so in the verse you have the word unnataha, they are noble people or lofty people. Glossing unnata as mahan, the text in the commentary, there is an auto commentary called Vivarana, which is by the same author, Brahmadatta. He says, Sahi mahan yaha sadhita sakalaha paropakara vyasani. And if you look at this gloss, you won't even recognize this as being connected to the Bhāvaviveka because it is a prose citation. It's a prose paraphrase of who is Mahan. He says, Mahan sadhita sakalaha paropakara vyasani. However, I hope you will agree with me that this yaha sadhita sakalaha is a paraphrase of avaptani avaptani. Paropakara vyasani is obviously the same expression. And I would argue that this commentator, I haven't found any other citation in this text. It's a big text. I'm still reading it. I have not found so far any other direct or paraphrased citations, but it tells us something. It says that amongst the scholars of Kerala, this text was so well known that you didn't even have to cite the Karikas as they were, and that it was kind of acceptable to give it in paraphrase, and the definitions implicit in the text were acceptable to scholars, and they could remember them, and they could use them also in these slightly different forms. That is the list of citations for Mahan and the Karika for Mahan I have found so far. But I'd like to draw your attention to a similar verse, not exactly the same verse, but a similar verse for which I have found two citations. I don't know where the verse is from. The verse is something like this, and perhaps you could, any of the people in the audience here could remember this. And in the course
may I interrupt, Naresh?
Yes, sir.
This definition for Unnata is also given by Divākara, no?
Yes, Divākara also has a definition for Unnata. He gives Unnata and Mahan separately.
Rishi also.
Rishi is in the half verse immediately after Bhutam Bhavishyatcha.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
For Rishi.
Bhutam Bhavyam Bhavishyatcha Yo Veta Sa Rishi Smrita.
So Rishi, exactly. Bhutam Bhavyam Bhavishyatcha Yo Veta Sa Rishi Smrita. Exactly. And that is one of those rare examples of a half verse definition where he doesn't give it a full karika and in half an anushtup.
Sorry for interruption. You are proceeding to say something else.
Yes, I was starting to speak about this term Mahabhaga. So in a place in the Shakuntala, we have a citation for Mahabhaga. Where does it come? I think in the fifth act there is a verse of Sharadvata talking to Sharangarava.
Fifth act.
Mahabhaga kamam narapati rabhinna sthitirasau.
Fifth act. It is in fifth act.
Fifth act.
Conversation between Sharangarava and Sharadvata.
That's right. So Sharangarava
or Kanchukis.
No, it's Sharangarava because he's saying Jana Kiranam Manye Hutavaha Paritam Kanchuki cannot say this.
Yes,
it has
exactly.
To be, you know, like after COVID, when we go out in public, we suddenly have this crowd anxiety. We feel afraid to go out in public space. So just like that, this poor Sharadvata, Sharangarava, he says, Mahabhaga kamam narapatihi abhinnasthitirasau nakaschid varnanam apatham apakrishtopi bhajate tathapidam shashvat parichita viviktena manasa janakirnam manye hutavaha paritam grihamiva. So the point here is that he describes the Narapati, the king, as being a Mahabhaga. And there is a Keralite commentary again called Dingmatra Darshini by Abhirama. We don't know so much about this author. We have not been able to satisfactorily, there is not enough information from the incipits and the colophons. But so this Mahabhaga in this verse, he glosses it as Yaduktam Arabhyotpatti Mamrutyoho Kalanko Yasya no Bhavet Syachaivanupama Keertihi Mahabhagassa Uchyate. So someone who is Arabhya utpattim amrityoho. A person who from birth to death, yasya kalanko no bhavet. So let us take it as yasya kirtehe kalanko no bhavet, who is unsullied, who is unbesmirched. Syacha anupama kirtihi, and who has incomparable reputation. Sa Mahabhaga uchyate. Such a person is called a Mahabhaga. I always struggle to translate these Bhava terms. So maybe Mahabhaga we can call an illustrious one or a great one. And Abhirama, he gives this verse. And I feel that this definition of Mahabhaga even may somehow be in the same style as Divākara's style, and it may be inspired or informed by that. This verse on Mahabhaga, if we had seen it only in one place, we could have said that perhaps it was Abhirama's own Karika, and he may have just concocted a Karika. I don't think so. I looked for this verse also in the Bhava Prakashan, and I couldn't find a source. But there's another late source which is interesting. There is a Purva Bharata Champu by King Manaveda, very long and very full of rare words and scholarly verb formations. And somewhere in the 11th Tabaka, he calls the Ashwasas of the Champu as Tabakas. There is a verse which goes, Evamenam Mahabhagam Udirana Sammadam Samahuya Abhyadat Evam Ambam Lana Mukham Bujam. Maybe it should be Ambam Lana Mukham Bhuja. So anyway, the commentary is by a certain Krishna Surya, Krishna Pandita, who was a teacher of Manaveda. And he says Mahabhaga, and then cites this verse from Abhirama's Dingmatra Darshini. Arabhyotpattim amrityoho kalanko yasya no bhavet syatcha ivanupama kirti Mahabhaga uchyate. And I think that this definition of Mahabhaga too can be seen as kind of a conceptual extension. We don't know where from. It's not from Bhāvaviveka, but I see it as being in the same style as the Karika of Mahan that we find in the Bhāvaviveka. So this was just to give you a flavor of how one could try and look at the definitions. There are some easier Karikas in the Bhāvaviveka where we can see them as being more or less simple paraphrases of the definition that one finds in the Dasharupaka. And those are less interesting. He has worded it in a bit more crisp way. But I thought it is interesting where he has very original definitions to try and track what must be the intellectual and conceptual raw material that he was using to formulate these definitions. There's another verse that is quoted a lot from the Bhāvaviveka. One could call it the superstar verse of the Bhāvaviveka, which is the Karika for Utkantha. But maybe we can discuss that another time. The author quotes a few verses from the Bhāvaviveka, and this is very, very interesting for me because I look at it as being an instance of this true cross-pollination of disciplines. People did not think that speaking of raga and dvesha and emotions in the world of kavya and nataka, where they are kind of aesthetic emotions, and in the world of real experience, as you speak about in a medical text, so where you're speaking of psychological emotions, that you don't make a distinction between aesthetic emotions and psychological emotions. And I think this is a very sophisticated approach, as shown by the tradition, in not making this distinction between one kind of bhava and the other. So the Karika for Utkantha goes Alabdha Vishaye Rage Vedana Mahati Tuya, something like that. And Samshoshani Chagatranam Tam Utkantham Vidurbudhaha. And this verse, one can say, is the Bhāvaviveka's greatest hit, because Mallinatha has this verse from somewhere. maybe he got it by reading Parameshwara Sumanoramani or from Purna Saraswati's Vidyul Lata. Sorry, I've been saying Vidyul Lekha all this time. And then this verse just, I think because of 19th century publications of Mallinatha's commentary, it has traveled all over North India. So 19th, 20th century modern commentators of Kavya and Natya, starting from M.R. Kale, will frequently cite this verse, and they don't know where it is from. They will say Abhidhana, and they think it is from some lost Abhidhana Kosha. But this verse in two versions, Rage Twalabdha Vishaye and Alabdha Vishaye Rage, is frequently, I have found more than 20 citations for this verse in old and new commentaries. And I think the oldest datable citation is found, interestingly, in a commentary of a Madhva Stuti. So from the Dvaita Sampradaya, there was a scholar called Trivikrama Pandita, roughly from the 14th century. And there is a commentary called the Kavikaranamrita, written by a scholar of his own tradition. And there we find this Karika being quoted. And that is another example of the widespread of these Karikas from Bhāvaviveka. That's about what I wanted to discuss today. I don't want to go on more and more about the citations of this Utkantha verse. I just wanted to present to you a kind of snapshot of the kind of complicated tangle, the network of citations, both primary and secondary citations, that we find of these definitional verses of bhavas from the Bhāvaviveka, and to share with you my difficulties of tracking them and trying to see which of these are perhaps secondary quotations where somebody just read an older commentary and got these verses and never really had access to the Bhāvaviveka. And this is what I'm doing right now. And I hope to also write a kind of a critical introduction, which is a discussion of the bhava. And I feel both in traditional scholarship and in the granthas we have, and in modern scholarship, people often speak about rasa too much and not enough about bhava. And there is a kind of complicated nature to bhava and the bhedas of bhavas, and that it is somehow at the intersection both of intelligence and feeling. This is kind of a, let's say, a summary report of recent work I've been doing in my study of the Bhāvaviveka. So from this slightly disorderly discussion, if you could get any insights and if you have any points to discuss, maybe we can open it up for the discussion now.
Ajitan, you are there?
Yeah, thank you, Naresh ji, for giving us a wonderful presentation. And it's now time for discussion, interaction, etc. So I invite all who are interested, or all those who like to add something, or those who need more explanation. I invite all them to the discussion. I would like to start with Sundaresan sir.
No, I would like to hear Professor Venugopal Panikar first.
There is a verse on the Gajendra Moksha where it describes when Gajendra went to all the gods asking them to protect them. They said, Naham, Nachaham, Nachabhavati Punaha, Tadrisho, Madrisheshu. Each of them said, no, not me. Another said, no, not me, go to the other person. And the third person said, no, there is no such person amongst us. So this reminds me of that.
Not like that, Professor Venugopal Panikar. I think I'm sure that he has got to say something.
No, I was just joking. Sir, you're on mute, sir. Professor Venu, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Everything is new to me. So when any comment will be will be impertinent on my part. Everything that you said is quite new to me. So when any comment will be kind of impertinent on my part.
So let me say something. First of all, I appreciate your diligence in collecting data and going deep into many texts and to connect them. It was a wonderful presentation. I will start with referring to one of your casual remarks. 2 PhDs on the same topic. Amogha Raghav Champu. So, if their approach is different and their Naresh, are you there?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Please. Please.
Why can't there be 2 doctoral theses on the same topic if the approach is
yes,
different?
Of course. They can be, I think, people keep making new editions of the Meghaduta, people keep making. So then I think, in a way, I would say, and one should not judge a PhD thesis too harshly. It's the first important research document one does. Then whichever is the second has a responsibility to notice the first.
Yeah,
yes, that is there.
And then to make a point about, are you using new manuscript material? Because if you have produced an edition using the same 2.5 manuscripts,
Two editions.
The same 2.5 manuscripts, then I have to say something about how my work is not obsolete and how my work is making some kind of an advancement of the field as compared to the other, just as a professional good practice.
So you are referring to 2 editions of the same text.
So both the theses are editions. Both the theses do not do
in that case, okay. I withdraw. Regarding the identification of Vishnu with Purna Saraswati, have you seen Dr. Harinarayana Bhatt's thesis on Anargha Raghava Panchika? He has got something to say regarding this identification of Vishnu with Purna Saraswati.
So So I have used. I looked through the Panchika in great detail, and I think.
Interestingly, Harinarayana Bhatt is Professor NVP Unitari's student.
That's right. He mentions this as well, and he says, Professor Unitari is my teacher. I disagree with his identification of Vishnu with Purna Saraswati, and because also I think in the Panchika, both the big and small version, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure there are no citations from this Bhāvaviveka. But that doesn't prove anything, isn't it? Because it could be that the Bhāvaviveka was written after he wrote the Panchika commentaries, and so whoever, let's say Purna Saraswati, then cited from this Bhāvaviveka afterwards. So he has this. He has an argument. I have my notes based on Bhatt's introduction to the Panchika, but I feel that this small data point that I have may also strengthen that argument. The fact that if you're quoting a verse from some Purvasuri, you can make a mistake and you can say Bhāvaviveka, Bhava Prakashana. But if you're quoting a verse from a family member, I think you will get into trouble if you attribute their verse to some other text. It is all incremental evidence. None of it is going to be definitive evidence. But so that I felt was a new insight.
Okay, I too actually have not gone through the thesis of and the arguments of Harinarayana, but I know that he differs with Unithiri, Professor Unithiri, and
That's
this
right.
identification. Okay. Now, what do you think of this giving definitions of Mahatva, Unnatatva, or Mahan, Unnata, Rishi, etc. in a text dealing with the bhavas?
It's a fine point, sir. I think also towards the end, he has given definitions of some.
And he is not speaking about Mahatva or Rishitva. He is simply defining who is a Mahan, who is a Rishi.
Yeah. I think but that is now it is more about grammar, isn't it, rather than Mahatah Bhavam, Mahatvam. So
Okay, that is there. But it is entirely different from the bhavas like
it's true. I totally agree with you. So, and it is a puzzling question. I will only join you in posing this question and not in giving an answer. Because yes, sir.
Let me explain. What is the difference between bhava and rasa? Literary theorists say that bhavas have something as impending rasatva or rasi bhavana, and they are technically denied of the status of rasahood. That is the difference, no? So this Mahatva, Annatatva, and Rishitva, they are not going to get the status of rasahood.
Right.
So why these Mahatva, Rishitva, Unnatatva are taken for consideration? Why they are defined?
So let me add to the complication, because towards the end of the text, he even has karikas defining colors. So he has a karika defining, I think, shara or karbura or something like that.
Pardon? It's not clear.
Color.
Towards the end of the text, he has some karikas defining colors.
Kara.
Color.
Oh, color. Okay.
I'll give it to you in a moment. I'm looking at the text. So again, I think some of these are just repeated from the Natya Shastra, but Sitanila Samayoga Kapota iti Sangitaha, Sitapita Samayoga Panduvarna Prakirtitaha. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
So there are these verses defining what is Kashaya, what is Gaura, what is Kadara. And just before finishing the text, so it is indeed a bit of a puzzle. Why if you're calling the text Bhāvaviveka, why should you include these things? Is Kashaya, or maybe Kashaya is a bit metaphorical, but things like this, Gaura, Kapota, they are certainly not bhavas in the same way that Darpa or Asuya or Utkantha are bhavas. And I don't have a satisfactory explanation for it, except in that maybe at some point while writing the text, he was speaking about bhava from just the state, from the sense of it being a state, an ontological state. So the tatutva of any of these things, the tatutva of being a rishi, the tatutva of being a mahan, and if you look at it from the perspective maybe of the Keralite stage, he wanted to say that there is such a character who can be called a mahan, and maybe all of these color terms are also used to describe.
See, the difference is that these Mahatva, Unnatatva, Rishitva are spiritual states, and they are not emotive states.
Right. So again, so could he be challenging some of our categories that? And he doesn't do many of them. He doesn't describe, say, dhurtatva or dushtatva. If he wanted, he could have just then expanded it to describe all kinds of not just psychological states, but these kinds of socially defined categories, or like you said, spiritually defined categories. there is a small number of karikas defining these, and I can't explain what is a single category or a single meaningful definition of bhava that should capture all of these. So we can suggest another hypothesis. We can say that perhaps this is a text that was not meant to be a text at all. And what do I mean by that? Could it be a text that was put together from commentary? That, let us say, there was some Divākara who was either a teacher who gave lectures, and as he was glossing kavyas and natakas, he could formulate these very beautiful definitions. And whichever thing that came up at the time, whether it was Gaura or whether it was Mahan or whether it was Asurya.
Okay. So I'm happy that you have I have succeeded in bringing you to this line of thought, because see, you are going through many Keralite commentaries. Do you think any of the text as the outcome of the classes or conversation between students and teacher, any commentary as a product of conversation between or discussion between teacher or peer group discussion?
I can't say very definitely, but for example, the fact that the Anargha Panchika exists in a big version and a small version, to me already that is a sign that these represent the equivalent of lecture notes, and one is a brief version of lecture notes, say from one cycle, one paryaya of teaching, and that the next time using those same notes that somebody took down while Vishnu taught it, he expanded some more things, and then that student or somebody wrote it down. And I can think of another example of perhaps no, that is not a correct example. No, but please, do you have an example of this kind in mind? I'd be very interested.
No. I have at times I doubt. Yes. I tend to think like that.
I feel this is true of many of the commentaries where we find the author referring to themselves in the third person, and then of course scholars of Sanskrit literature, they tie themselves into knots to say whether the vritti for Kavya Prakasha and the verses are by the same person, the vritti and the verses in the Dhvanyaloka are by the same person. And I feel all of these problems could perhaps be resolved if we looked at it this way, that they are the product of that person's mind, but maybe not the product of that person's pen, and that somebody compiled it and wrote it down. And I feel this is all right now a bit hypothetical, that the Bhāvaviveka too could be such a text. And this kind of, if we discover a citation from the available Kerala commentaries for every single verse of the Bhāvaviveka, then I would be very happy, and that would prove that somehow it was a text put together from citations, either within the lifetime of the author or later somebody collected these. And it is not unheard of. Sometimes commentaries can invent a person and they can invent a text.
Okay, coming to another point, you are referring to a commentator on Ashtanga Sangraha or Ashtanga Hridaya, citing verses from Bhāvaviveka in his introduction. Actually, it is, where does it come? In the exposition of the verse Ragadi Dosha and Satatanusakta.
That's right, yes, the Prarthana Padya itself.
If it does there, then it is not a case of transdisciplinary approach, because the text itself speaks of Ragadi Dosha, and here Utkantha, the definition of Utkantha is based on Ragadi Dosha.
But just a moment, he calls it Raga Roga or Ragadi Dosha, and I wonder if our author is looking at it as a dosha.
Who? Divākara.
Divākara. Whether he looks at them as rogas or doshas. So in the first verse of the Ashtanga Hridaya, it goes Ragadi Rogan Satatanusaktan, whereas our text doesn't seem to consider raga or any other emotion as being roga. They look at it as some kind of a mental vikara, and not in a in a neutral sense. So I feel there is a minor difference there.
Okay. And the final one point, you are referring to D.P. Tatacharya or D.P. Tatacharya,
DT
who has
Tata.
edited 3 commentaries of Dandin's Kavyadarsha.
That's
Is
right.
he the same person who has edited Kavyalankara with English translation, whom P.V. Kane severely criticizes?
Yes, it's the same. He was the Shiromani from Tirupati.
He is from Mysore.
And he also published some Mimamsa text, I think.
Oh, yes. He is known to be Mimamsaka.
The same
Yes,
scholar.
the
And
same person.
there is a Krishnamachar publication where he has taken from D.T. Tatacharya, Shiromani's commentary, and published 3 commentaries. One, I think, is by maybe
Tarunavachaspati.
Tarunavachaspati, one may be by Vadhi Jangala, and one is this anonymous commentary. And now we know some minor bit of information about this anonymous commentary, that it may be from Kerala, post Bhāvaviveka.
Okay, fine. So, Ajitan, I have stopped.
Okay, sir. Naresh, I have a few doubts. One is you spoke much about the reception history of Bhāvaviveka, but you didn't dwell on the uniqueness of the text Bhāvaviveka. In what sense this text is unique? And to what extent the author takes us further, where Bharata left his discussion on Bhava and Rasa?
It's a bit hard to say what he does that Bharata doesn't do, because this is a very limited text, and it is only giving us small number of verses. So it's not like a grantha that covers the various aspects of bhava. Like if you look at the Bhava Prakasha, there is also some theory, and here this is a very brief text. It has one verse at the beginning, one verse at the end, and in between just these karikas defining each bhava. But let me try and say how it is interesting. So the very first karika is about Preeti, and then it goes Pumsaf Purva Paribhuta Sukhitvena Vyavasthitihi Buddhehe Unmilani Gadha Preetitvena Nigadyate. And then the next karika is on Nirvriti. And then the third karika is about Darpa. But then what he does is, while defining Darpa, he says, Preeti Nirvriti Nignanam Araga Vishayepi Yaha Pravrittim Kurute Bhavaha Pusam Sadarpaha Uchyate, Darpasa Uchyate. So in a way, he kind of builds his definitions in an intelligent way. So you define, it's not this kind of circular definition, but that you define one thing and you define another thing, and then you define the third thing in terms of what is known. So you don't go from unknown to unknown. You define Preeti and Nirvriti, and then you define Darpa in terms of things that people have already understood. So the kind of the first principle we learn as teachers, going from familiar to unfamiliar. So you first teach simple things, and then you teach the complex thing on basis of the familiar thing you've already taught. So I feel this is kind of a sophisticated innovation of our author, and also the fact that I feel it's a Shastra style that is very accessible. So he defines ahankriti, the sense of ahankara, but he doesn't define it in some Vedantic way, and he defines it in a very laukika way. So it is aham tu shaktas karyesmin nami shaktastu jantavaha itham asprishta karyatma gunadoshastu ahankriti. So the mental state where one thinks aham shaktastu karyesmin na ami shaktastu jantavaha. So somebody who feels that everybody else is incompetent, everybody else is useless, I am the only one who's competent. And I find that this is it seems I don't know the right expression. I don't want to say colloquial, but it seems like an everyday style. And I can almost hear a teacher giving this kind of an analogy in Kannada or in Malayalam, while if you asked in class, so what exactly is ahankara? And how is ahankara different from garva? And how is garva different from darpa? And if you think about it, in most circumstances, we only have an
very casual and very informal way of
that's right.
explanation.
Informal, but it is sugraha. It is intuitively accessible. And I feel that is the way, that is the strength of this text. Not in making some sophisticated scholarly formulation, as much as being very clear and very accessible, which further strengthens the idea that it may have been the product of these lecture sessions. That's what I feel, maybe the strength of the text. We can compare. I could have done that. Sorry, sir. Please go on. Yes, please.
If I say that what Divākara does is delinking bhava from rasa, or shifting the focus of Ganesha from rasa to bhava. That is what he does, or intentionally or unintentionally, that is what he does. If I say like this, what would be your opinion?
That's a fine point. I would totally agree with you, and I think it is part of a movement, and I feel that also Sharada Tanaya's Bhava Prakashana was part of this same. It is not just just a sudden departure of one author, and I feel that we can also see this in the commentaries. Again, to come back to my favorite domain, the commentaries of Kavya and Nataka. Very rarely do they give a gloss on the rasa in a situation, and also because rasa is not supposed to be swanama vachya. In the kavyas and natakas, they do not use the rasa terms at all. Very rarely do they use them. Whereas both the terms, the vocabulary of bhavas from the standard list that we find in Bharata and the Dasharupaka, and then many other of these allied terms and synonyms for the bhavas, they frequently occur in the Kavya Natakas. So it is not just Divākara single-handedly, but all of the writers of these plays and the commentators of these plays who are kind of drawing us into a world of bhava rather than a world of rasa. Because
now, if I go to the extent of saying that Divākara, what Divākara does is making bhava a laukika one, just dragging down bhava from the aesthetic world, from alaukika world to the laukika world.
I will totally agree with one small modification. I will say it is not dragging down. So if we look at the alaukika and laukika, not as being worlds that are vertically stacked, but somehow that they are parallel worlds, then he's saying that there cannot be much of a difference in the substance of a certain bhava in its alaukika version and in laukika version. Sure, in its whatever truth value or something, there may be difference, but utkantha you feel in real world and utkantha that the yaksha feels in the Megha Sandesha are substantially, they are not different from each other. And I feel that is what he's doing. I totally agree with that part of your formulations.
So, Nareshji, thank you. Another question. You have been saying about a couple of verses which have been drawn on to other commentatorial works of Kerala, particularly a discussion about Mahabhaga. But
Yes.
how do you connect these concepts of Mahan and Mahabhaga, and how do you contextualize this within the discussion of bhavas?
Yeah, that was the question raised by Sundareshwara also.
About how Mahan and Mahabhaga,
because these are not at all
bhavas,
directly connected with the discussion of bhavas. They
It's
are
true.
Then why did you choose these concepts other than why don't you go to find parallel verses in other texts, particularly about the discussion of bhavas?
Yeah, I mean, I also found citations and parallels for others. So I similarly have a long slightly boring discussion of Utkantha and the many citations of Utkantha, which is a more standard bhava. There's no reason for choosing one over the other. It is interesting because it tells us something about the project of the Bhāvaviveka, which is not intuitive. If a text called Bhava X discusses what we understand as bhavas, that is not surprising, and that we can all understand. But if a text called Bhava X speaks about Mahan, and not even Mahanness, but Mahan, and then discusses that, and let me answer your question in two levels. First level is that if there was an author called Divākara, and if he indeed wrote a text called Bhāvaviveka, and we believe that, and if he was an intelligent man and not drunk or crazy or something, which also I choose to believe, why did he add a karika about Mahan? So there must have been some rationale. Second level, if he was not crazy and drunk, and if all of these commentators who used this verse were not crazy and drunk, the fact that all of these people don't have a problem with it, and we seem to find a problem with it, is interesting for me, which means that this is a kind of it poses an intellectual puzzle, and we have to solve that puzzle. We have to solve that puzzle by digging through the mountain from both ends. One is to try and understand it from our position in whatever modernity we inhabit. How can this make sense? And the other is to do this kind of time travel and think about how could it be, what would be their rationale for it that could make this an acceptable category for them. That Mahan is also a kind of bhava in a non-trivial way, not in just the state of being X, but it could be bhava in a text of literary aesthetics. And because it poses this kind of puzzle, I chose it. But yes, we could have discussed Preeti or Utkantha or something, and there too we have many citations. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thank you. One more question. To what extent this text has been influential, other than the quotations you have shown, so other than these references of Mahan and Mahabhaga, at another level, if we think that the discussion of bhavas and his formulation of bhavas, his perception of bhavas, how his perception or his formulation of bhavas has been influential.
Do you mean in terms of the literature in Kavya Shastra and Alankara Shastra?
Yeah, his influence on later writers.
Yeah, this is a problem, and it's a very good question. I'd like to have an answer, if not right now, maybe a few years down the line. So let me first not answer. Let me answer the question you didn't ask, which is that his influence on these commentators is great. Professor Unitri identifies 5 authors who have cited from him, and I have identified more than 20 authors who have cited from him. And there are still some theses I've not got access to, and some theses have been published. I mean, some commentaries have been published as PhD theses, and I have a hunch that they may quote from Bhāvaviveka, or I know that they may quote from Bhāvaviveka, but I haven't yet seen those. But there's a surprisingly big number. Like I said, I found 20 odd commentators from Kerala who cite from this text, and I've even found extra citations in the same texts that Professor Unitri has identified, which he somehow missed. So that's the first level. It was influential in that these Kavya Natya commentators considered this as a kind of pramana and as being a good source of definitions of bhava. The second question is, see, let's assume this author was before Purna Saraswati and it was available as a single text. There is, as far as I know, there is no big, significant, influential Alankara Shastra text after the 13th century that comes out of Kerala. So you have some of these very late texts that are following the style of the Yashobhushana, the Prataparudra Yashobhushana, and the Koleamanda, and there is a commentary on Kavya Prakash, I think, by somebody called Vedanta.
Naresh, please, you may change your position because your voice is not audible clearly. Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay now.
What I was saying is that there are no big, influential Alankara Shastra texts from Kerala after the 13th, I mean, also before. So we have these texts that mostly are discussing a set of 100 alankaras and giving examples for them, what you could call the Yashobhushana type Alankara Shastra texts. So we see the influence of Kulayananda, we see the influence of Kavya Prakasha, but we don't see any other such. There is one text called Rasa Viveka, one Alankara text, and also the name is a bit tempting. I looked through the Rasa Viveka and I don't see any connection so far between Bhāvaviveka and Rasa Viveka. But who knows, if we look at it again with a fresh pair of eyes, maybe if Professor Sundareshwaran and you read it, you may find some connections. So far, my provisional report is that I haven't seen the influence of Bhāvaviveka on any such text. Though I can give you one interesting piece of data. There was a scholar, V. Ramaswamy Shastri, and he, soon after the Bhava Prakashana of Sharada Tanaya was published, he of course had access to manuscript libraries. So he knew about the existence of Divākara's Bhāvaviveka. And in the Bhava Prakashana, Sharada Tanaya says that he was instructed by his teacher, who was running a drama theater. He was like the manager of a theater. He was a Rangapati. I don't know how to interpret that word. Perhaps he owned a theater called Divākara to write the Bhava Prakashana. And this Ramaswamy Shastri instantly makes a connection saying, oh, this must be the same Divākara who has written these Karikas. And Professor Unitiri disagrees. I do feel it's unlikely because I don't think we can establish that when we look at the same Karikas connected to the same Bhavas in the Bhava Prakashana of Sharada Tanaya and in the Bhāvaviveka, we cannot give any conclusive argument that Bhava Prakashanakara had Bhāvaviveka in front of him. But again, if more people read these texts and if they read them closely, if they read them with better Vyutpatti than I have, we may have some new insight. So who knows, we may have more clarity. It might be that Bhava Prakashana is deeply influenced by Bhāvaviveka. Somebody may be able to make a good argument. We have to wait and see. And the more pairs of eyes, the more minds look at these texts, higher probability that we'll have correct and better insight. That's the state of knowledge I have right now.
Thank you, Nareshji. I invite others to the discussion. If you find it difficult to express your views in English, please you may leave your message in chat box, and Nareshji will be reading and giving you the reply. Or you can ask in Malayalam itself, and someone else would translate it into English. So
No, he understands Malayalam.
Oh, then it's not a problem. So I invite others to the discussion.
Now I am one among the others.
Yes, sir, please.
I am asking one question. Is the text well designed, well planned, well knit? What would be your answer?
No, I think it's, I don't want to say harsh things like it's poorly designed, but I think at a neutral level, we have to say that in some places, like I told in the beginning, the first verse is on, we find some verses which are meant to be in clusters. So, Priti, Nirvriti, Darpa, they are arranged in a certain order. And those three verses should be received and should be understood exactly in that order. And some other times we see that one comes after the other, and there is a relation. So after discussing Garva, he discusses Shlagha. So there is a kind of thematic connection. After Garva and Shlagha, he defines Abhimana. So there is some kind of thematic connection, but not all the time. Mostly, to me, it seems like these are random jottings, that each verse is kind of self-contained, and it is not divided into sections and subsections or anything like that. There is, towards the end, like I said, these Shobha, Vilasa, Bibboka, Kuttamita, those are received as a set, you see, from the Natya Shastra. Dasharupaka takes the same set in the same order. Our author also, he has said that Angika Bhavas.
Included for Shastra Purti.
That's right, for Shastra Purti. And then when there is a cluster about these color terms, Gaura, Kapota, Pandura, he puts it all in one cluster. But they mostly seem like standalone karikas. And I think we should also recognize the value of this, that if there is a cluster of karikas which are very intelligent, you may not give it the status of being a Udgrantha. Nonetheless, this collection of karikas also has some value, as you may not want to call it a text in some conventional sense. But that reminded me, something I promised to say in the beginning, that I said that Professor Unitri's edition is not the first time these karikas were published. Yes. And let me give that bit of information now. I'm very happy to say this because it is done by one of the great scholars I like very much and whom life did not treat very kindly, Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi, who is a great pioneer of Sanskrit and Telugu literature, who has published the firsts of many important things. First edition of Dingnaga's Kundamala, first edition of Avanti Sundari Katha, he was first one to publish Natya Shastra with Abhinava Bharati. Sir?
M. Ramakrishna Kavi.
Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi. He went on this trip on manuscript libraries all over the country, looking at manuscripts on Sangeeta and Nataka and Natya, and he wrote it all down, and he made very copious notes, which I think he was also a bit suspicious. So he wrote the notes in a way that others couldn't understand them. So he doesn't always mention where he copied something and what the source is, which manuscript number it is, which made it after his death difficult for people to use his material. But he collected all of the material, and I think posthumously they published something called the Bharata Kosha, which is a compendium of all the insights he collected. And again, I say this with some reservations. The great scholar V. Raghavan, he was very uncharitable in his review of both the Bharata Kosha and I think of Kavi's edition of the Natya Shastra with Abhinava Bharati. Those things aside, Ramakrishna Kavi had seen and had copied the Bhāvaviveka. I will even go so far as to say that the manuscript that we have in GOML, it's a paper manuscript, is the handwritten copy that was written down by Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi when he came to Tripuniti.
Oh.
So this must be a copy that he made or he had made. And in his, the Bharata Kosha, of course, is an alphabetized.
Transcript is in Sanskrit script, Devanagari?
It is in Nagari. It's a Nagari transcript.
Okay.
And so in the Bharata Kosha, he has, in alphabetized order, he has covered all the topics connected to Natya and Sangeeta. And I have found at least 70 karikas, iti Bhāvaviveke, that he is citing from here. And in 2 karikas, I even found significant textual variations. So this is another unexpected, Akrishta unexpected source for the karikas of Bhāvaviveka. And I'm not obsessed with critical apparatus and producing an edition which claims to be the definitive edition as much as to understand these definitions clearly and give good, rigorous translations, and also to map the citation. So that is the other source. And strictly speaking, one must say that Kavi was the first to publish.
Thank you.
Say that again, please.
Let us stay for 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Is there a particular reason?
No, let's wait for someone else to be
to see if
part
there
of the
are any other
discussion.
questions or
If
discussion.
anybody is interested in this.
Yes, sure. Okay, yeah.
If not, we will wind up the session.